Yeah, good evening. As been said, my name is Simeon. I'm Andy and Judith Carter's son, who some of you may know, and I grew up in St George's. About kind of 5 and a bit years ago, I moved to Southampton to read philosophy at the university here, and I've since graduating basically just stuck around. I'm now working as a trainee at Above Bar Church. So yeah, as Chris said, I've been given the challenge to give a philosophical perspective or in answering that question. If God is good, then why? Why poverty? Why pain? Why suffering? So yeah, I'm going to try and do that, but I feel I should start with a caveat. I think everyone should study philosophy. I'm a big fan, and it's clearly the best subject. But I actually don't think philosophy can answer this question. I guess that is a bit of a disappointing disclaimer to start with, but all hope isn't lost because I do think it can massively help us as we begin by kind of getting us to think about what it is we're actually asking. Why does suffering impact our view of God, whether he's good or whether we believe he is even there? You might be thinking, Simeon, what a stupid question. Isn't it obvious? Didn't I hear Graham's story? How could God let that happen? Or perhaps you're thinking of situations in your own life and kind of shouting at the screen, going, here's this guy speaking. If he knew what I've been through, he'd see it's obvious there's no God. And, well, you wouldn't be alone. For centuries, people have grappled with this question of evil and suffering. Suffering existing and God existing together feels kind of problematic. But there's nothing in those two statements that actually contradicts. Writing in the 1950s, an Australian atheist philosopher, J.R. Mackie, gives a kind of a helpful structure for seeing what the problem is. He says that Christians must hold on to three claims. One, God is omnipotent, meaning God is all powerful. He can do anything and everything that he likes. There's no limits to his power. Two, God is wholly good. And something that is wholly good always eliminates evil as far as it can. Three, evil exists, or for our purposes this evening, suffering exists. These three things, God is all powerful, God is wholly good, and suffering exists, are inconsistent, Mackie says. See, if there's suffering in the world and God has the power to get rid of it, then how can he be wholly good? And if there's suffering in the world and God is wholly good, then it must be that ridding the world of suffering is beyond his power. And if God has the power to get rid of suffering and is wholly good, then there'd be no suffering in the world. It seems to believe all three of these together is irrational. They don't add up at all. This structure is something often called an inconsistent triad, if you like the terminology. The three statements together contradict each other. Pick any two of the statements and you're fine. But all three together, it's not only difficult, but impossible without completely abandoning logic, without becoming some kind of mad person. And that puts Christians in a bit of a tricky position. Which one are they going to reject? They can hardly deny that suffering exists. Just look at the world. Just look at 2020. Just listen to Graham's story. And they can hardly deny that God is all powerful. The Bible makes that clear. God is the Almighty. He is the one who created all things. All things are possible with God, Jesus tells us. Is anything too hard for God? God asked Abraham. God surely is omnipotent. So if we're accepting these two things, does that mean God isn't good? No. God is good. God is wholly good. In fact, God is goodness itself. The Bible makes that clear too. No one is good except God alone, Jesus says. So have I abandoned logic, bitten the bullet and said, stuff it. I have my cake and eat it. Yeah, I'm going to say God is omnipotent, God is wholly good, suffering exists, even if they're contradictory. Well, yes, I'm going to say those three things. But no, they're not contradictory, and I've not abandoned logic. How so? It's because Mackie implies something that's wrong with his middle statement. God is wholly good. Yes, I agree with Mackie. But then Mackie says, and something that is wholly good always eliminates evil as far as it can. Do I agree with that? Sort of. There is some truth in this. The Bible tells us that one day evil will be completely eliminated. Because God is wholly good, suffering will be got rid of. Full stop, done. But God being wholly good doesn't mean suffering can't and won't exist now. Because God's plan is still unfolding. History hasn't finished yet. I think Richard will say a little bit more about this later. That's all I'll say for now before I'm made to stop. But hopefully this helps us kind of think a little bit more, make more concrete the questions we're asking. We need to focus our thoughts on what it means for God to be wholly good. Does it mean that he gets rid of suffering in our lives as we face it? Or is there a bigger picture involved?